might be inappropriate. That might be inappropriate. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone in attendance. The committee has under consideration the estimates of the Ministry of Indigenous Relations for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023. I'd ask that we go around the table and have members introduce themselves for the record. Minister, when we get to you, please introduce the officials who are joining you at the table. My name is David Hanson. I'm the MLA for Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul, and chair of the committee. We will begin starting with my right.
Sure. Shane Getson, MLA, Laxon and Parkland.
Peter Guthrie, Airdrie Cochrane.
Good morning, everyone. Cyril Turden, MLA for Spruce Grove, Stony Plain.
Taniano, Fort McMurray, Wood Buffalo.
Good morning, everyone. Peter Singh, MLA, Calgary East.
Good morning, everyone. Jackie Lovely from the beautiful Camrose constituency.
Good morning. Pat Rain, Lesser Slave Lake.
Good morning, Rick Wilson, Minister of Indigenous Relations. With me, I've got Christina Midbowl, my deputy, what's her name? Donovan. Just kidding. Donovan Young, Sonia Johnston, and Don Quast with me here.
Hi, Richard Fian, MLA, Edmonton, Rutherford.
Warren Huffman, Committee Clerk.
Thank you. A few housekeeping items to address before we turn to the business at hand. Please note that the microphones are operated by Hansard staff. Committee proceedings are being live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of meetings can be accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. Members participating remotely are encouraged to have your camera on while speaking and your microphone muted when not speaking. Remote participants who wish to be placed on a speaker's list are asked to email or send a message in the group chat to the committee clerk. And members in the room are asked to please signal to the chair. Please set your cell phones and other devices to silent for the duration of the meeting. Honourable members, the standing orders set out the process for consideration of the main estimates. A total of 2 hours has been scheduled for consideration of the estimates for the Ministry of Indigenous Relations. Standing Order 59.01-7 establishes the speaking rotation and speaking times. In brief, the Minister or member of Executive Council acting on the Minister's behalf will have 10 minutes to address the committee. At the conclusion of the Minister's comments, a 50-minute speaking block for the official opposition begins, followed by a 20-minute speaking block for independent members, if any, and then a 20-minute speaking block for the government caucus. Individuals may only speak for up to 10 minutes at a time, but time may be combined between the member and the Minister. After this rotation of speaking time will then follow the same rotation of the official opposition independent member and then the government caucus. The member and the minister may speak once for a maximum of 5 minutes, or these times may be combined, making it a 10-minute block. If members have any questions regarding speaking times or the rotation, please feel free to send an email or message to the committee clerk about the process. Ministry officials may be present and, at the direction of the minister, may address the committee. Ministry officials seated in the gallery, if called upon, have access to a microphone in the gallery area and are asked to please introduce themselves for the record prior to commenting. Pages are available to deliver notes or other materials between the gallery and the table. Attendees in the gallery may not approach the table. Space permitting, opposition caucus staff may sit at the table to assist their members. However, members have priority to sit at the table at all times. If debate is exhausted prior to 2 hours, the ministry's estimates are deemed to have been considered for the time allotted in the schedule and the committee will adjourn. Points of order will be dealt with as they arise and individual speaking times will be paused. However, the speaking block time and the overall 2-hour meeting clock will continue to run. Any written material provided in response to questions raised during the main estimates should be tabled by the minister in the Assembly for the benefit of all members. The vote on the estimates and any amendments will occur in Committee of Supply on March 21st, 2022. Amendments must be in writing and approved by Parliamentary Council prior to the meeting at which they are to be moved. The original amendment is to be deposited with the committee clerk with 20 hard copies. An electronic version of the signed original should be provided to the committee clerk for distribution to committee members. Finally, the committee should have the opportunity to hear both questions and answers without interruption during estimate debate. Debate flows through the chair at all times, including instances when speaking time is shared between a member and the minister. I would now invite the Minister of Indigenous Relations to begin with your opening remarks, and you have 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a beautiful morning out there, and I just wish everybody a good morning, and thank you all for coming this morning. So I'm joined, like we said earlier, with my Deputy Minister Donovan Young, Assistant Deputy Minister of Finance and Senior Financial Officer Sonia Johnston, and Assistant Deputy Minister of First Nations and Metis Relations Don Quas. So thank you again, Mr. Chair and committee members, for calling this meeting. It's an absolute pleasure to be here to speak with you about Indigenous Relations budget estimates for fiscal year 2022-23. I get to see all your smiling faces finally again in person this year, so that makes me extremely happy as we gather on Treaty 6 territory, and I also acknowledge the Métis people too, who have a deep connection with this land. I'd like to introduce you to some other members of my team who are with me here today. Assistant Deputy Minister of Consultation, Lands and Policy, Michael Lundquist. Director of Indigenous Women's Initiatives, the amazing Christina Midbo. My Chief of Staff, Ted Bauer. Policy Advisor, Melissa Crane. And my Press Secretary, Adrian South. Also in the gallery, our Finance Director, Howard Wong. And Communications Director, Olga Mikalithis. I see we only have 2 hours this year, which is a little disappointing, of course, but we have lots of good things to discuss and to see what are the most important. One of our most important ministries only requested for 2 hours by the opposition. It's a bit sad, but understandable. But let's get to it. This year's estimates maintain core program funding for the coming years as we move forward in Alberta. This level of certainty and consistency couldn't be more important after an especially difficult year for Indigenous people in Alberta and across Canada. From the reclamation of more than 1,000 children who did not make their way home from residential schools, to ongoing experiences of racism in everyday life, and to the trauma and violence too many Indigenous people, especially women and girls, are two-spirited, or LGBTQIA+, are experiencing. There's been a lot of heartache. There's a saying that in action there is hope. And we need an abundance of both hope and action so that we can get to a better place. That's why I'm especially proud of this year's budget, which shows that good things can happen through fiscal responsibility. I want to be sure First Nations and Métis communities can thrive for generations to come, not to burden their children and grandchildren with debts that we failed to manage. Anyone who's done the calculations is going to see that the Indigenous Relations budget is down by 15.5% compared with budget 2021. But we have a very strong rationale for that. The Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program capital grant funding sees an 18 million reduction, but that's due to the schedule of progress payments and the completed projects. There's a $10 million reduction in the First Nations Development Fund. That's due to the updated forecasts in casino revenues. And there's a $3.6 million reduction in land and legal settlement funding due to scheduled progress made to implement the treaty entitlement claim for the Big Stone Cree Nation. And the funding for the claim is being carried forward into fiscal year 2022-23. There is also a $3 million reduction due to the natural conclusion of the Indigenous Litigation Fund. Now, these decreases are offset by new spendings amounting to nearly $2 million for initiatives to move toward reconciliation and to review and implement recommendations from the Alberta Joint Working Group report on missing murdered Indigenous women and girls. So I'll just take a chance to explain this here. So the Indigenous Litigation Fund, which has given 3 Indigenous communities grants to fight for their livelihoods against unfair federal legislation, was only intended to be available for 1 year. We extended it to be sure those communities that had viable, ready-to-go litigation programs could get the funds that they needed. Another reason for the budget decrease is from the expected variability of the First Nations Development Fund. This grant program is funded through revenue from government-owned slot machines at the 5 First Nation casinos in Alberta. So following COVID-19 protocol requirements, it put a major dent in casino revenues. And that has affected the projected amount available to share between the 46 First Nations that benefit from the First Nation Development Fund program. So budget 22 includes $113 million in 22-23. But forecasts are looking really good for this program, and with a bright recovery ahead, increasing the budget to $120 million by 23-24. And that is much needed good news, because the First Nation Development Fund, that puts dollars back into First Nations to invest in their social programs, economic development programs for their members. Budget 2022 includes $11.6 million in funding for the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Plan to support continuing projects. And some of these projects are multi-year, and that, of course, is going to affect the budget. And we've also carried forward $1.5 million in funding for 2 projects that were originally scheduled to be completed in 21-22, but are now expected to be completed in 22-23. So I'm also pleased to confirm the budget 2022 includes $5 million in capital grant funding for the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund program. Now, this important program provides capital funding for Indigenous community-owned businesses and development opportunities. And we've also moved unspent funding for other multi-year projects, like our land reclamation at Big Stone Cree Nation, to budget 2022 to align with projected activities. My commitment as the Minister of Indigenous Relations is to build prosperity while helping to create opportunities for people to support themselves and their families. Like the rest of Alberta's government, we are doing our part to secure a healthy and prosperous future for more people. Now, that future, a future of hope and promise, depends on the actions that we take today. We must take action on 2 priority fronts. The first is toward reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. The Premier and my Cabinet and caucus colleagues stand beside me when I speak to this urgent need to close the outcome gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. But reconciliation goes further than this. First thing it does, we have to start from a place of acknowledging the truth about harms perpetrated on Indigenous cultures, languages, ways of life, and lives themselves. And it continues as we lift each other up. As my good friend Dr. Willie Littlechild says, Alberta's government has been working toward reconciliation through large and small actions. And he likes to call it reconciliation. And here's a small sample of what the government has done. Items that have been requested for years by First Nations. Items that now have been taken care of, like eliminating the Alberta Indian tax exemption card to simplify how First Nations people and bands purchase tobacco and fuel, and creating a financial instrument that levels the playing field, the AIOC, the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, so communities can get secure, lower rate loans to fund investments in projects that are going to generate long-term returns. This organization has rolled out 3 projects, secured grant funding for another, and this work needs to continue. And with nearly $1 million in budget 2022, we will be working with Indigenous communities and across government to say yes to more initiatives that fill needs and bring us closer to reconciliation. We also have nearly $1 million to review and implement recommendations from the Alberta Joint Working Group on missing murdered Indigenous women and girls. They did extraordinary work engaging Indigenous families, communities, and organizations to help our government set a path toward hope and healing. Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited LGBTQIA+ people should have the freedom to dream about safe and successful lives in Alberta, not to worry about their safety and their well-being. On both these fronts, I've heard calls to rush the work, as though the changes needed are superficial and easy. But I put together the teams and put in time toward reconciliation and toward safety. I can summarize this budget in a few simple statements. Maintaining core funding for operations, including time-bound programs and completed projects, moving funding into future years to match projected milestones as required, and reflecting the natural variability in casino revenues. Most importantly, this budget invests new funding to priority initiatives. We have a plan, Mr. Chair, and we continue to work with Indigenous leaders to refine and revise. Budget 2022 supports this plan while caring for the real needs facing Indigenous peoples, families, and communities today. And we're moving forward in a way that respects Indigenous leadership toward their own destiny. In many ways, our work is to take down barriers and provide supports where too few exist. Alberta's government takes seriously our role as partners in prosperity, as partners in reconciliation, and this is our chance to create real change for a bright, strong, and healthy future. I thank you for this time, and I'm looking forward to your questions today and your comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Minister. So I'd just like to point out to the members of the committee that times will be shown on the 2 clocks up on the wall, so you can kind of keep track of what your speaking blocks are. Minister, are you willing to go back and forth today, or are you looking for block times?
We're going to try block time this year.
Block
thank
times?
you.
Okay, then, Mr. Fian, you have 10 minutes starting now for a total of 15-minute block.
So help me just to understand, I have 10 minutes, then it goes back to the minister for 10
For
minutes?
10 minutes, yes.
Until our 50 minutes is up?
Yep.
Okay, well, a little disappointed that we're going to go block this time, but I guess that's where we're at these days in terms of ministerial accountability. First of all, I'd like to take an opportunity to acknowledge that the land that we're on, Treaty 6, but of course the treaty areas of 7 and 8, which of course we are responsible for here in this legislature, and of course the land significant to the Métis people of the province of Alberta. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the many people that work for the Ministry of Indigenous Relations, because having been there, I know the incredible level of dedication that they bring to the work that they do. And, you know, their continual striving toward excellence, and I just want to say how much I appreciate that, because it sounds like I'm so critical ever after this, but I know that's not on the people who do the work. Okay, well, I guess my only choice then is to read questions to the record and hope that some of them get answered over the next little while, and I'll just do that. Let's begin with some overarching questions, and then we'll kind of proceed to some individual line items. First thing I noticed is that the budget for 2022-23 is approximately $33 million less than the budget set out in 21-22. There's a third year in a row that there's been a decrease in the overall budget for this ministry. At the same time that we know that the Indigenous population in the province of Alberta is growing at a faster rate than the rest of the province. And we know that Indigenous people are overrepresented in most indicators of social distress, including measures of poverty, mental illness, and school dropout. The needs in the community are surely growing. So I would love a bit further explanation from this government, this minister, why in a year with record oil prices that the government has failed to address the significant needs of the growing Indigenous population in this province. Now, I know the minister has indicated that that they are participating in the larger governmental initiative of government restraint, but this size of this budget is very small compared to any other ministry. I can't imagine cutbacks in this ministry have much to do with ultimately balancing the budget. So it's discouraging to see the constant attack on the budget of this ministry. The drop in the budget is approximately 16%, I think 15.5, I think the minister said. Well, the budget for the province overall has risen slightly. Sorry. And I just wonder why Indigenous people in this province have been singled out for cutbacks when that's not necessarily true of the overall budget of the province of Alberta. When the minister does get a chance to answer some questions, I notice that there is no change to the capital investment budget year over year. And I wonder if we can have an explanation as to what the money in the capital budget will be used for, and why there is no change in that, either reflective of the overall decrease in the Indigenous Relations budget or investment for the purposes of the minister's priorities of reconciliation. When we look at the budget, it's important to remember that there are two significant line items that are not monies provided by the province of Alberta, and I've done this before, so the minister knows that I would like to separate out what the province is actually putting into this ministry versus money that happens to just flow through the ministry. So in our budget, line item number 4 on page 126 of the budget indicates that money taken in from the First Nations Development Fund, which is money raised through the 5 First Nations casinos and distributed by the department, is not actual government money. And line 8, again on page 126, the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Fund is money provided by the federal government. So if we take these two lines out of the budget, because they're only essentially flow-through dollars, the government only contributes about $57 million for Indigenous relations in this province on a yearly basis. A pittance, really, when you think about the billions of dollars spent by this government every year. So even accounting for significant losses in these two programs, which the minister identified in his opening remarks, the reduction of the department budget this year in terms of specific money provided by the provincial government directly is approximately 9%. And given that this budget in Indigenous relations is only about 1/1000th of the overall provincial budget, why was this department singled out for dramatic cuts? Because clearly these kind of savings are not going to be effective in helping to balance an overall budget. It's the fact that there's been a continual decrease in the IR budget over the years, that every single year Indigenous relations is singled out for a higher level of cuts than almost any other ministry in the government is significant. I think we need to point that out. I'd love to hear the minister's comments on why Indigenous people are being treated in this way. I did notice, however, that on line 1, that while cuts to programs have been significant, there's been no cuts to the operating budget of the minister's office. Just this last week, the government has initiated salary negotiations with healthcare workers, such as respiratory therapists, social workers, and pharmacy assistants, and has begun with the position that these workers, who are so essential during the time of a global pandemic, should have a salary rollback of between 6 and 11%. So while these heroes of the pandemic have been asked to reduce their salaries, no one in the minister's office has been. Can the minister explain why he's not asked the political staff in his office to surrender an equal amount of pay as these essential workers, or perhaps even the 9% loss to the overall budget? Excuse me. Moving on, I'd like the minister to tell us if there has been any change to full-time equivalents across any parts of his department, in which division of the department those FTEs have been reduced or eliminated, and which areas of the budget the reductions will be felt the most. What programs will be eliminated or reduced as a result of changes in FTEs. Thank you. Now moving to line 2 in the budget. I see that there is a small decrease in the budget for First Nations and Metis Relations. Can you tell us if this reflects a change in actual services being provided by the department to Indigenous Albertans? It's not a significant change, but clearly not keeping up with population growth and inflation by any means. So there certainly is going to be a reduction in services one way or the other, or a significant increase of burden on the people who are performing these services on behalf of Indigenous Albertans. The forecast for line 2 indicates that this area significantly overspent the budget in the last year by approximately 42%, a dramatic change from what was actually budgeted. It was budgeted for $15 million approximately. In fact, the forecast looks like they will have spent $22 million. So clearly there has been some demand. There's been some need over the last year. Can you explain why there was a significant over-expenditure in this budget line? And if there was a legitimate over-expenditure, why is it not acknowledged in setting the new budget? If we needed that money last year, will we not need it next year? Perhaps the minister can help us understand a little bit more about that. have a number of questions about the two different aspects of that budget, the First Nations and then the Metis Relations. I know they're separate divisions within the department, but I've run out of time, so perhaps I'll wait for my next section. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, member, and I was very interested in seeing how you tied in negotiations with AHS, but you did bring it back to the ministry, so I was about to ask you to get back on topic, but it was, coming from experience, I guess. So go ahead, Minister, you have 10 minutes to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm glad you brought up the budget right away, because for Indigenous Relations, this is a good news budget, a very good news budget. We've got increases around reconciliation. We've got increases for all the good work that Christina's doing with their Missing Murdered Indigenous Women panel there. And so I was really excited when we were able to keep our budget intact and keep our core funding intact, especially for our Aboriginal Business Investment Fund. That's a $5 million fund, as you know, for small businesses out there. So I was really happy with our budget this year. A lot of, you're saying it's not that big a budget, but we're a small but mighty ministry. We do a lot of good stuff, and I'm so happy with our staff, with all the good work they do in there. We work with other ministries, all of the ministries, like even the Premier asked all the ministries to work through us on reconciliation projects, and they're constantly coming to me with ideas and things that they can do around reconciliation. So that's really exciting. Everything from transportation, we've got an amazing minister there. She's working so hard, great heart for the Indigenous people, and coming up with ways to help them out with roads, of course, on First Nations are not that great, and access to them, especially when the fires were going up north, we really saw that the need for better access to the communities is really important. And there's a lot of projects, like Alberta is back. Let me tell you, this is, buckle up, this is going to be a great year. And there's a lot of activity, especially going on up in Treaty 8 area. And so we have to really be cognizant of that on some of these roads, there's going to be a lot of activity, truck activity and pipeline activity. So we have to make sure these communities are safe. We just met with a couple of groups yesterday up in the Wood Buffalo area that were concerned about the road situation up there and how we could help them out. And so we're working on that as we speak. We talk about our staff first year in. First thing I did was start reductions in staffing. We took a 20% reduction in staff in the first year. We're stable now, but we did all the cuts the first year. I thought, let's just rip the Band-Aid off, get it over with, take the cuts, and get it done. So we did that in the first year. And speaking with Donovan, we're actually getting more done than ever before. Like, the staff is so dedicated, they're working hard. Like when you say we've got a great staff there, we do have a great dedicated staff, and you're right to thank them because they do some amazing work for us there. And in my office staff in the ledge there, unfortunately they took a 7% rollback right off the start. There was no increase, it was a rollback. And I really have to thank them. They work as hard as I do. Like, if I'm here 16 hours a day, they're here 16 hours a day. They don't get any extra for putting in all that overtime, so I thank you for all the work you put in, and I really do appreciate it, and without them I couldn't get anything done. They're my right hand, my left hand, and just an amazing group of people out there working for me. So some of our increases, you said our budget increased. That was a good thing. The bigger increase was that community research grant. That's $8 million, and that was for reconciliation. It was a sad year when the graves were discovered, and past Grand Chief Willie Littlechild, he says, we don't need symbolic stuff now. He says, we need action. Minister, take action. So I was so happy that we were able to come up with the grant. And it's a very flexible grant. I didn't, like Donovan likes to say, we're the passengers on the bus, they're the driver. So we put that $8 million out there. It's about $150,000 per community. We left it open to them how they want to use it. If they want to use it for the ground penetrating radar that's going on out there, if they want to use it for the elder circles, to speak with the elders to see what they should do, if they want to create memorials, we let them do that. We left it totally flexible. And we also left it if they want to go together. So the graves that were found just up in Gerard here in the last week, there was actually the Lesser Slave Lake group up there. They all went together. So there's five First Nations up there. So instead of doing the single grants, they took it as one block. So it's $750,000. And like I say, that's up to them if they want to use it as a memorial, whatever project they want to use it on. We're letting them drive the bus there and decide how they want to spend it. We had, of the $8 million, all the communities that put an application in have got notice that they're going to be receiving their grant. So all of that money, a lot of the money's already gone out the door to these communities, and the rest will be going out shortly. So they've all got notice that they will be receiving these grants. So we're really excited to do that project to help the communities out. And then also Alberta AHS stepped up as well and came up with a mental health grant around that. So that worked out to about $50,000 to communities that they could use, again, flexible for, because there's a lot of, like when all this starts coming forward, there's all this past trauma that starts coming up, and so there's a lot of issues around mental health issues and that type of thing. So we wanted to make sure the communities had access to that. And then Alberta Health put an additional, how much was it? They put in several $1 million for mental health that they would use internally for Indigenous people. So 8 million total altogether, yeah. So two $8 million grants going right off the start. So that was really good, and the communities really have got on board with that and accepted that. And also, we were approached by several engineering companies that wanted to help out as well. And so there's a lot of pro bono work going on right now with the ground penetrating radar. So I encourage the First Nations always to, if they want to use the companies that have offered to do that service for free, to do that, and then they still got the money left to do other projects. So also I believe the University of Alberta was working pro bono on a lot of projects as well. So that's great that we can, stretch that dollar by companies just stepping up. And we didn't ask them to do that. They just stepped up. They said, we want to help. How can we help? So it was really encouraging to see that happen. One of the areas we're talking about a decrease, so it was on the FNDA, that's the First Nation Development Fund. So that's a fund that the First Nation casinos, from the gaming proceeds, part of the money goes into this First Nation Development Fund on the profit side of it. Now, because of COVID, of course, they were shut down quite a bit. So it's a scientific guess as to how much money that's actually going to come in on that. So we're guessing very conservatively that the funds are going to be down. But I was just at River Creek Casino just the other morning, a meeting with the staff over there, and they're actually, after talking with them, I'm quite encouraged that it'll be the opposite. We're going to have actually more funding than ever. River Creek Casino, for example, they've gone to 24 hours being open now. They said by doing that, that's like increasing 90 days of operation. I didn't realize it was going to be this big, and they didn't either. They thought they might just be a spillover, but it's because some people don't always work the same hours, 9 to 5. They get off work at 2 in the morning and they want to go relax, so they go to the casino or whatever. So that's going to create a lot of extra income for them, and we may actually be on the other side of this one on that, which is really great because that money is used for social programs on First Nations, housing, economic development, could be building a playground. They can use it however the communities, maybe a van for taking people to hospital, that type of thing. So I was really encouraged when they said that they're looking at, knock on wood, having a banner year this year and actually creating more money than they had before. You talked about some of the money we get from federal grants. That's always welcomed. We use that for the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. These are great projects, and we try to use them wherever we can. We've been lucky enough working with some of the First Nations, for example, down in southern Alberta, Kainai country, doing the Red Crow College program there. the Premier has a real love for culture and languages. So when they lost their college down there due to a fire, province stepped up and we helped them to build a new college there, which they're really excited about. I was down there when they were doing the groundbreaking and then when it was being built, and the whole community was so excited to see this new structure going up there and have the ability for their kids not to have to, as you know, that's a long ways from Calgary down in Kainai country. So for them to be able to have a college right in their backyard was really amazing, and it's for the whole community. They welcome all people into the college.
Thank you very much, Minister. Go ahead, Mr. Fian, if you're going to take the next 10-minute block.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will go back on just one of my questions first before I proceed with the other ones, and that is I asked about the fact that in the First Nations and Métis Relations budget there was a bump up of 42% in the last year from the budget to the actual forecast spending, and didn't indicate why there was such a dramatic uptick this year as compared to last, and why, if there was a legitimate need to bump it up this year, that is not continuing into the future. Is it just that you're engaged in one-offs, or are you just again planning to overrun that budget line item as we move forward? I also noted that the minister talked about the $8 million for reconciliation with regard to the residential schools, which of course something that we all support. I'm glad the money is into that. I'm glad to see that at least a few of the recommendations for response to the residential schools of the 6 that are there, at least the ministry is doing a couple of them. And I see that's what the $8 million is about. However, I have concerns, and I did ask in the House about this, that the recent discovery of 169 graves or potential graves, I'm not sure how we need to refer to them, but at the St. Bernard Residential School in Gerrard, Alberta, that Chief Sidney Hallcrow indicated that they had spent their own money on that because they were no longer prepared to wait for the government to provide dollars. Now, you indicated in the House, as you have indicated here, that they are part of a project where they will receive monies for this. I'm wondering what has been the delay and why the nation felt it was necessary to proceed on their own before the actual dollars arrived. I'm glad they're coming in finally now, but I don't understand why they've had to wait this long for the monies. So staying with the line 2 in the budget, the First Nations and Métis Relations have a number of other questions perhaps you can talk to me about, so I can understand how this money is being spent and what decisions have been made. It's about why the money has decreased from the actual spent money of this year. So I'm wondering what programs are going to be lost and what services are going to be diminished as a result of this budget. I'm a bit surprised that the minister talks about this loss of at least 9% of your budget as a good news budget, but I will leave that as it is. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about the nature of the protocol agreements with treaty organizations. I know that there was some plans to move ahead with new protocol agreements. My understanding is that there are currently 2 protocol agreements, one with the Blackfoot Confederacy and one with the G4. The attempt to establish one with Treaty 6 apparently failed and is no longer in existence, and apparently the previously existing one for Treaty 8 is no longer going. Perhaps you could tell me if you have been able to, within this the monies allotted to the First Nations and Métis Relations, been able to negotiate any more protocol agreements, and we expect any progress on that in the coming year. Can you also tell me whether or not there are currently any councils of elders working with the First Nations or Metis Relations that are helping to set the priorities, the directions of the work in these areas? There have over the years been a number of at least ad hoc councils of elders brought together for various projects. I'm just wondering if there are any currently existing anywhere in the ministry, or if there's any plans to involve elders. I'm also concerned at the circumstance of elders reporting to me that subsequent to receiving some recognition of their work on these elders councils that had a financial piece attached to them, that they were then told that that money would be deducted from other monies that they received from the province of Alberta in terms of personal support. So as a result, the elders actually lost money over the last year if they participated in some of these councils and received money, which they believed to be money that was done in with respect to protocol and not payment. So perhaps that could be maybe explained to me so I can pass on to the elders who've been calling me saying that now they're in trouble with taxes as a result of these decisions. Can you tell me as well whether or not this division, either perhaps the First Nations or the Metis Relations divisions, are involved in any work on anti-racism initiatives? As there have been in the past, as you know, there was an anti-racism committee that is now, my understanding is not working or is not producing any results, or is perhaps completely defunct. And that's the piece I want to know about. Is there anything in line 2 that I should understand about specific anti-racism initiatives? Can you tell me as well whether or not in either of these divisions, the First Nations or Metis Relations, there are any educational initiatives that are going on in completion of some of the calls for justice for the murdered and missing Indigenous women's inquiry, asking for educational initiatives both within the Indigenous community and outside of the Indigenous community. I'll have a lot more to say about that inquiry a bit later, but just want to know if there are any educational initiatives that are going on right now. Are there any new plans moving forward that would be reflected in this budget for any educational initiatives? Can the minister also report to this committee about the work that this ministry is doing, or members of the First Nations and Metis Relations staff are doing across government ministries to provide services to Indigenous Albertans? Are they involved in programs in other ministries that will enhance the well-being of Indigenous people in the province? If so, can you tell me which cross-government initiatives are supported by funds in line 2? And that is the work of the people who work in the First Nations and Metis Relations. What their role is in enhancing the work in other departments, and whether or not there's any increase or decrease in that. This division is also responsible for urban programming, and we know that over the last number of budgets, when we've seen these repeatedly severe cuts to the budget, we have seen a significant dramatic cut to urban programming. Number of programs are completely eliminated in the first year or two, and others experience severe cuts. And we're just wondering whether there have been any changes to the urban programming that is financed through this section of the budget. Have the severe previous cuts been reduced in any way? Are there any programs that are receiving funding now who were previously subject to the acts?
A minute and a half.
Thanks. Can you tell me about some of the specific programming that is typically been funded through this ministry in the past? For example, the Institute for the Advancement of Aboriginal Women has been receiving $100,000 in core funding for the last 5 years, I think it is now. Maybe it's more. Perhaps you can get the exact number, but I believe it's 5 years, with no apparent change, no increase in spite of the fact that inflation has gone up. Can you tell me if that $100,000 continues to be paid to the Institute of Advancement of Aboriginal Women for their core funding, And of course, I believe it is $15,000 for the Esqueo Awards. Has there been any change in that, or is that continuing? I have the same question about, in line 2, about the program, the New in Town program for the Bent Arrows Association. Are they continuing to receive the amount of monies that they previously have received? Is there a reduction in that at this time? Or is there any acknowledgement that the increased costs of the significantly rising number of Indigenous people in the province of Alberta who are moving to the cities, and therefore the significant demand on the program, has there been any decision to increase the financial support to the Bent Arrow program? I'll continue with my questions in my next block. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Member. Minister, you have 10 minutes to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I captured everything you said there. There was a lot of questions in there, but I'll go through it, and if I've missed something, we can catch up with you later there. So, we talked about let's talk about that bump in the grants there. So of course, that was the $8 million is the community research grant. So that was a one-time grant that we got out to communities, and that's what they're accessing right now. So that's basically where you're saying that there's an increase. It wasn't an increase for staff or anything else. It was an increase to go to the communities to help them with that community research grant. In that St. Bernard area, like I say, the Lesser Slave Lake group, there's 5 of them there. They received it as a one lump sum. That was $750,000. And that was their choice. That's what they asked for, so that's what they got. Unfortunately, they didn't put their application in until just, I think, 6 or 7 weeks ago. So that's the reason that it takes a while to process that, of course. But it has been approved. And as soon as we got their application, we went to work on it right away because I knew they were working on it. I was actually literally up there last summer when they had started the ground penetrating radar. And we looked at the site with them, and the University of Alberta was on site at the time doing that work for them. So, you know, we got, the money was there. As soon as they asked for it, we got it out to them. There may have been some confusion because maybe they didn't realize that they'd asked for it as a group funding, but that money is available to them in that area for that. I'm really happy about the protocol funding. I want to talk to you about that. So, new Grand Chief of Treaty 6, Chief Arcan, great leader. Several good meetings with him already. Just met with him the other night with the Premier. He's so excited to work with this government. He tells me that all the time. And in the last 2 events I was at with him, he mentioned that he wants to move forward with the protocol agreement. So we are setting up a meeting with them right now to move forward with that protocol agreement with them. We've already got funding provided for them to kickstart the process, plus they will get the funding for the protocol agreement as it moves along. So I was literally just with him the other day. We were out at the Edmonton International Airport there. A young girl had just started a new business up. She calls it the Indigenous Box. Pretty amazing. Young entrepreneur. She starts this business in her basement a year ago, putting these boxes together with products from local artisans. It could be a scarf. It could be some handmade soaps and chocolates, and she puts them all in these nice little boxes, and then corporations can use these for corporate gifts. So she started out in her basement a year ago, built 50 boxes, thought if I can sell those, that'll pay the bills and it'll be good for the year. Her first 50 boxes she sold in the first hour. She's now moved to a 3,500 square foot warehouse at the airport. They've got an incubator program there. She's like their little rising star there. They're just gushing over her. They love her so much there. She's doing such a great job. She, in the last year, over $1 million. Her first year operations, her and her husband. It's pretty amazing. So I was tickled to be out there and just be part of that and see her great success story. And that's where Chief Arcan mentioned the first time that in his speech that he wanted to carry on with the protocol agreement and start working. So we've already started working on the tables and with their staff, and pretty excited to be getting that protocol agreement going with Treaty 6. It's basically a memorandum of understanding how we work with the with the Treaty 6 group. So there could be a table on education. So this gives them direct access to the education minister and the ministry staff. They'll work with them on building the programs. There'll be one around transportation, so Minister Sani's group will be working with them on road issues, sewer, water, those type of things. Health table, that's really important. Over the last year with COVID, we've seen how important it is to protect the vulnerable people, and that's one thing we really pushed hard was with the First Nation was with the COVID protocol. We knew they're a very vulnerable group. You know, still a lot of poverty out there on some of the First Nations, and we knew they're a vulnerable group, so we worked with them to make sure that they were one of the first groups to get vaccinated. We made sure that they had personal protective equipment. I put out still a weekly newsletter just with everything that's available to them to make sure that they have access to all these different programs. And Alberta Health's been working closely with them. So it's all of these things add up to show you how much this government really cares about our First Nations people, to make sure that they do have the programs in place when they need them. So like I say, the protocol agreement, the money's out there. We're going to be doing one with Treaty 6. We're already doing the Treaty 7 group. Just met with them on a couple of tables. Was that last week, I think? 2 weeks ago. So that's moving forward. We've got some great programming there. And in there, it also, one of the things is they get a one-on-one with the Premier. So they're really excited to be doing these type of programs with us, these protocol agreements. So I'm happy that Treaty 6 protocol agreement is back on track. We talked about elders. In the Indigenous community, elders are so important, like to get that knowledge from them. We work with a good friend of ours, Gilman Cardinal. He works with the government. Just saw him the other day. He was doing a class here. It's our Indigenous Learning Council. He does a great work with that. Then when we started the AIOC board, right off the get-go, we could see we needed an elder there. So we brought in an elder to work with that group. So before anything ever gets started, we always make sure that we consider the cultural needs, and we're addressing those issues properly. So we have an elder there. With Christina's group, with the Missing Murder Indigenous Women panel, we have two elders there. So we always start with ceremony and prayer and smudging and about a half hour of crying. Thank you for your work on that. That's right. Yeah, so and then you talked about the Iaew funding this year. So there's close to $1 million, it's about $900,000 in that program. And I believe we're still good with the Iaew. Because of COVID, we haven't been able to do it for the last couple of years, which is kind of sad. But that will be moving forward. Yes, good. So that's moving forward this year. That's a great thing to recognize so Iaew Cree, that's women, to recognize the Cree women and all the great work they do out there. So thanks for your help on that, Christina. Great job on that. Then what else are we talking about here? Oh, anti-racism. Yeah, that's huge. This government doesn't accept racism of any kind, and we've got health as Associate Minister of Health and Multiculturalism, Labour is working on that, and so we have input into all of these. Like I say, we do a lot of cross-ministry work. Before they start these programs, they'll come to our department and ask for help, and we've got some great people in there that can help them put these programs together to make sure that we are addressing these very serious problems around racism. It's sad that still happens, but we have to acknowledge it and work from that acknowledgement and try to do what we can to stop it. I think we talked about the employment partnership programs. The urban initiatives. So I know this is always a huge issue for you, member, around urban initiatives, and so we've made it a priority as well, because we do a lot of work, especially with the Bent Arrow group in the city of Edmonton here, to make sure that they have funding, and that funding is available to them this year. Donovan, he's like Scotty on Star Trek here. Every time I need some money, he seems to come up with it. And so he found me some more money this year. So I says, well, The extra money we find this year is going to urban initiatives and for women's initiatives. And so we focused on that. And so that extra funding is going into those programs. So I'm really happy with that. And then around our friendship centers, we have some great groups out there working in the friendship centers, especially the Calgary group down there. They do some amazing stuff. So we made sure that they've got their funding in place. And I was just down there 3 or 4 weeks ago. They were working on a seniors lodge. The Friendship Center helped put that program together. I believe it was about 12 units down there for a seniors lodge. Surprise visit there. I walk in the room and they set me down at the table, and so Susan, a blue cart, is sitting beside me. I'm like, is this Susan? It really was. So that was really exciting. And so then she gave us about an hour performance, like that was literally this far away from her. She's singing in some of her new songs, so that was kind of a highlight of the year for me.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that, and we'll move back over to the official opposition for the final 10 minutes of their block.
Thank you. I know that you just recently mentioned the friendship centers, and I'm wondering whether or not the amount of monies previously allocated to them, which I understand was approximately $720,000 a year, continues to be continue to be the amount of money. I know that's a significant cut from what it was at one time, but just want to know whether or not you maintained that cut in this budget. You also indicated that there was $1 million going to the IAEW. Is that core funding that you're now doing, or is that are you mixing a bunch of things there together? I just want to have some understanding of that kind of thing. Minister, over a year ago, the government unceremoniously booted the Nietzsche Institute out of the building they had occupied for decades without consulting the program. At the time, this minister made a public declaration to assist the institute in finding a new permanent location. Does this division in this budget, line item 2, have any resources to assist in fulfilling the promise made over a year ago to actually find a permanent location for the Nietzsche Institute? Now, a bit more about Metis Relations. In March 2020, the minister acknowledged to this committee that he was aware that the long-term agreement with the MSGC, the Métis Settlement General Council, had only 3 years left till expiry, which would mean that there'd be only 1 year left now. The minister stated at the time there'd be discussions to consider what would happen after the end of the LTA. Can the minister tell us if there's been any progress over the last 2 years on coming to a new agreement? And if there are any monies set aside in this budget to either establish the agreement or to actually fund a new or replacement program to the LTA over the next little while. The minister has also previously acknowledged in this committee that the future fund of the Métis Settlement General Council is close to coming to being completely dissolved. Given the end of the LTA and the potential loss of the future fund, the financial prospects for all 8 Métis settlements are quite dire. Can the minister indicate whether the staff of Métis Relations divisions are charged with any responsibility in terms of addressing this looming crisis, and whether there are any money set aside in this budget to address what is going to be a catastrophic change in the 8 Métis settlements over the next little while? Over the last year, the government made a number of changes to the Métis Settlement Act that were roundly condemned by the leaders of the 8 Métis settlements. They indicated there were no true consultations, only directive phone calls, and they asked the changes be stopped, which they were not. Can you tell this committee if there's any money in line 2 to reassess the one-sided alteration of the Métis Settlement Act and to institute consultations with leaders prior to any further changes going on? Moving on to line 3, it's been 3 years since the release of the final report of the National Inquiry into the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, and yet this government has not yet implemented any of the 231 calls for justice. A committee, of course, was formed, and it took a year to form the committee. Then the committee was given a year to act, but took 18 months. It may have been reasonable, I don't know. On that committee were 2 members of the government caucus who could have been in constant communication with this minister, and yet with both these members available to the minister about the contents of the report and the extended time given to the finalization of the report, the government said they would still need to consider the report after it was provided to the government. So having, two members of caucus on that committee who apparently was not fruitful in terms of communication with the government. Why has the government failed to release the report? And how much of the funding in line 3 is dedicated to fulfilling these recommendations? I know the minister has mentioned that there are just $2 million instead of $1 million approximately in the in line 3 Indigenous Women's Initiatives, which means that there's potentially $1 million of money that could have been spent for fulfillment of the report on the MMIW. Because the minister has failed to release this report publicly, it's hard for us to know whether or not that money is in any way adequate. And so I wonder if the minister could confirm that this report contains approximately 117 recommendations to the ministry. How many of those recommendations do you intend to fulfill? And if you have $1 million for 117 recommendations, it would indicate that you intend to spend approximately $8,000 per recommendation. So it seems that the minister is not overly intent on achieving anything substantive with the use of $8,000 for each of these recommendations. But because the minister has failed to share with the public the report that the public paid for, we have to ask the questions in a general way because we don't know what the recommendations are and whether or not there's any intention for this department to actually fulfill any of those recommendations. All we know is that there's $1 million put in to this division. We'd certainly like to know a little bit more about that. So when will the government stop the secrecy and tell us how much funding is available for what kinds of actual initiatives? I know that Line 3 also previously included funds for the Indigenous internship program, which was canceled by this minister early in his term, and I'm just wondering if there is any intention, if the program has been reinstated at all, or if there's any intention of bringing the program back. Don't have much time, so I'm going to skip a few of mine. Now, the minister has talked a little bit about the EPP programs, the Employment Partnership Programs, and I have serious concerns about the fact that the decision was made to reduce the amount of funding going to Trade Winds for Success, an Indigenous program that helped Indigenous people become involved in the trades. It was a very successful program, but how apparently the money has been redirected to a Calgary-based program that is not specifically indigenously focused. And I wonder if the minister could tell us about why the decision was made to defund Trade Winds for Success to the degree that it was. I know it wasn't completely, but to the degree that it was defunded, and why moving away from a program that is indigenously focused to a program that is not substantially. On line 9, we can see there's a substantial drop in funding for land and legal settlements. Can the minister explain why there is a drop? Is there no expectation of further outstanding TLEs in the coming year? Can the minister inform the committee about the status of the TLEs for Beaver First Nations and Fort McMurray First Nations? I understand that some money was there available for Big Stone, but I don't know if that is going forward or not. It appears that there's very little progress in terms of TLEs as evidenced by the money being set aside or not set aside. Line 10 also shows the closure of the Indigenous Litigation Fund, and I asked the minister to tell the committee how many grants were funded in this program when it did exist, and is the closure of this program indicative of the failure of the program to have any value? Line 11, with regard to the AIOC, the minister, of course, is quite proud of that program, and overall I'm supportive of the existence of the program. I certainly voted for it in the House. But I noticed that it is only 50% utilized in the budget, and I'm just wondering why there was such an underutilization of this funding, and why, if there was an underutilization, that the amount in the budget has remained the same. Why doesn't this year's budget reflect anything to do with the actual usage in the previous years? Can the minister tell the committee how many of the 48 First Nations were able to benefit from programs under the AIOC? In reviewing the list of the nations, I see that it's evident that most of them are already the highly successful financial nations and that have been participating. In my discussions with members of the Indigenous community, the high cost of participating in the program has been cited by a number of nations as a barrier, and as such, many financially strong nations have many less financially strong nations have been unable to move forward in this program. In fact, a number of communities have told me they've made multiple applications and been refused in this program. Can the minister tell us how many applications to this program have been refused by this ministry? Now I'm out of time again.
That concludes the first portion of questions for the official opposition. We'll now move on to the independent member for 20 minutes of questions. Minister, do you still want to maintain the block time, or do you wish to go back and forth?
Block time.
Block time? Okay, Mr. Lowen, go ahead. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Minister, and your department for being here today to answer questions and talk about the important work you do. I appreciate what you do and your care and concern for the Indigenous people in Alberta. I just have a few questions, a few quick questions there, but they are important questions, I believe, and I think you'll agree. So I just wanted to start out with asking how the process is going on identifying the residential school graves. Obviously, that's near and dear to my heart too. There was a residential school in Sturgeon Lake, which is in my constituency and very close to my hometown. So just a bit of an update on that, if you could, please. Pardon me. I also would like to get a bit of a report on what's happening with the Alberta Joint Working Group on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. You know, I understand the process has been underway and there's been, you know, time for input, and now it's time to see how these suggestions are going to be implemented. So just maybe a bit of a update on that process there and direction that you'll be taking. Just wanted to mention quickly about rural broadband strategy. I know that's with Service Alberta, but I just want to make sure that we are considering our First Nations people and their reserves. I know in my local area, the Sturgeon Lake Reserve, that's one of the dead spots in the cell service when traveling between Valley View and Grand Prairie. And so some of these reserves don't even have cell service, never mind the rural broadband. So just wanted some comments on that. And then last question would be on clean water. I did talk to the transportation minister about that in estimates, but I just want to know how many reserves in Alberta that don't have clean water. And I understand that some of this is a federal issue and federal money involved with working through that. So I just want to see what your department is doing working on this issue of clean water for our First Nations people. And I'll leave those comments there and let you respond. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. You have 10 minutes to respond.
Thank you for the great questions, and I know we spent some time up in your community there before, and it's a great community and some great First Nations up there. So I don't know, you got a big heart for the Indigenous people up there. Starting off on the residential schools, this is a tough area, and I'll try not to crack up here, sorry. You know, when you start, like to talk to before, you know, when the graves are first starting to get discovered, we said let's try to get some action going on this right away. So I talked to what we started with the community research grants, and in your area they are receiving those grants as well. So these are up to 150,000 per community, or like I say, they could group them up. So and they, like I said, we left that as flexible as possible so the communities could use it however they see fit. Because every community is going to look at this different. These are sacred sites to them, like so they're not like it's to even start digging them up like that. I don't know that too many are really actually going to do that. It goes against the culture to do that in a lot of places. So, but you will see a lot of the ground penetrating radar going on, and if your community is interested, if they haven't started that work, we have a list of companies that will do it pro bono as well. So they don't even have to use their money to do that type of work. We can get that done for them at no charge, which is really good because that leaves the money then available for other things. Like I say, it's really important to get like we talked about elders with the other member there. Elders in the community is very important. So to work with them to make sure that we're moving forward in a good way, and gives the community a chance to heal. Doing a memorial maybe. Even last summer, I remember I was out, we did our memorial garden at the legislature here. The Premier gave us one of the gardens to use as a reconciliation garden. And so we planted a tree there, and Chief Billy told me that was the most appropriate thing that we could have done. A sign of healing and hope. And that's what it's all about. We have to heal. It's happened. We have to acknowledge it. We have to acknowledge it. We have to move on, though. We can't just dwell with all the trauma. That's where we start getting into all kinds of trouble. So we've acknowledged it. We're trying to move on the best we can. On our little reconciliation garden we've started there, we're going to have a program going this year to name it. So we're going to go reach out to the communities to see if they'd like to put a name on it. And we work with all treaties, treaties 6, 7, and 8, of course, so that, because it's happened all across the province, just didn't happen in Treaty 8 or Treaty 7. So we want to work with that, and we want to do, as you probably noticed in the throne speech, there was a lot of content in there around Indigenous people in the throne speech. Very encouraging. I just met with the Lieutenant Governor the other night, and she was such an elegant woman. And she told me, she says, Minister, anytime you're doing something around reconciliation, missing murders, she says, I want to be there with you. So I thought that was really, really encouraging to get that response from her. So she wants to help us out as well. So we want to work, and we're going to go out to the communities again, get their input, so it's not government telling them what to do. They can come up with kind of a competition to see what type of memorial we want to do there, and work with the Ministry of Culture, again, cross-ministry work, to get a memorial built there. So that's really encouraging to get that done. And we'll be working with your communities up there to make sure that they're able to move forward. And anytime they need help, you know, just contact our office and we'll work with you to, if they need something extra, to move forward on that. You talked about broadband. So this is going to be a huge initiative for this government. Our Minister of Service Alberta, this has been his passion. When we're sitting up at night at 2 in the morning in the legislature, we started working on this program to increase broadband. I've been up in your country, and I know once people don't understand. You get an hour north of Edmonton, Mr. Google doesn't work anymore. Google Maps, throw it out the window. You better know where you're going. Or I spend a lot of time stopping at people's houses asking which way to the Metis settlement here. So I understand your issue, especially in the more remote communities around the broadband issue. And so we knew this is important enough and that this is going to be coming forward. We actually increased our mandate in the AIOC. So now, along with, so it's started out natural resources, so oil, gas, forestry, mining, and renewables. And now we've increased it to include agriculture, transportation, and broadband. So this is going to be a huge initiative as we start rolling out the program. So our government has committed $390 million towards the broadband initiative. We've got that full commitment from the federal government now as well. So it's $780 million, and the minister is confident working with the providers out there that he can pump it up to close to $1 billion that will be working on a broadband solution for all of Alberta. And where I really found this was important with COVID happening this year and the kids out of school. If you're in Edmonton or Calgary, it's no problem. You just sit in the basement and you can do your schoolwork. But when you get up in Todd's area there, they might have to drive an hour to get to the closest McDonald's or Tim Hortons so they can sit in the parking lot and do their schoolwork to get broadband. So we saw this as going to be a huge issue, and we're going to try to address it. We're working with Service Alberta on this program, and we were really hopeful that we can get a good, I'm not sure of all the technical stuff, but the upload, the download speeds are going to be consistent, so we've got a good broadband coverage all across Alberta. And this is going to be so important, especially in those rural, remote, and Indigenous communities where they don't have that good access to broadband. So we're really going to be rolling that one out, and I'm happy that we got it approved in our AOC now to include broadband into that, so they can make applications to become partners, and if they're might be doing fiber optic. There's going to be a real combination because it's different all across Alberta. Some areas have the fiber optic, and you might tie that in with a tower. Some areas are going to be just strictly off towers or through the the new Elon Musk one there, the Star, what's it called, Star something, Starlink, yeah. That some of it in really remote communities, you're gonna have to go to something like that, because you can't be, otherwise, you know, fiber optic to one house could cost you $1 million, so you do a combination of what's available and working with the industry, we'll be able to link up these communities. So I'm really excited to start rolling that one out. And then just while I'm talking about AIOC, our mandate increase, because I heard from a lot of First Nations, not everybody's blessed, like you say, to have the oil and gas in their backyard. Down south, they say they don't have oil and gas, but they got wind and water. So we have to work with what we've got, and some areas don't have anything, but to make, what they've come to me with is that culturally they want to be involved in agriculture in some areas. So that's why we included agriculture. And you're going to be seeing up in your area, Todd, there's going to be some groups coming forward with some new programs around some big agriculture projects, around ranching and that type of thing. So I can't let the cat out of the bag yet, but there's some really good projects going to be coming forward that I'm excited about, that we can, through the expanded mandate, that we'll be able to work with some of the First Nations and Métis groups up there. A lot of the Métis groups, of course, agriculture and ranching is a big part of what they do. So, like the member said, you know, some of the sophisticated First Nations, they have staff that have economic development staff. They have lawyers on staff, and they can get into these projects and write the grants. So what we really try to do is work with the ones that aren't as sophisticated, and we've actually built in a capacity program into the AIOC so that some of the not so sophisticated nations that don't have the staff on hand, we'll help them out. We'll help them build that business plan. We'll bring projects to them and help them to see if it fits in with what they want to do. So we're really excited about that, moving forward on the AOC, on the expanded mandate, and getting into the broadband and the agriculture. So we're really excited on that one. What else did we ask on? Okay, I've only got a minute left, so to start on the missing murdered Indigenous women is, I'll probably cry for the first 30 seconds, so I'll just say that we've got a great group out there. They've been working on it. Christine's done an amazing job, and I just can't thank her enough for moving that project, that program forward. It's been a work of love for them. Like I know they said that's some of the most important work they've done in their careers. Can't thank Martin long enough. He stuck with it right through the whole thing, and the guy's got a heart of gold and has done an amazing job with us on putting that program together. We have, the department has received the report. When we started that journey, we started it with ceremony, and so when I get the final report, we want to do it in ceremony.
Thank you, Minister. The member now has about 7 minutes and 50 seconds to...
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. Appreciate your responses so far. I do have to run to another meeting, so I'm just going to give you a chance to finish your comments on the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls work that you're doing, and then maybe cover the clean water. And so, since I'll have to run off, I'll be looking for your answers in Hansard. So again, no disrespect that I can't stick around for your responses, but I will be looking for them in Hansard, and appreciate your concern and your deep love for the Indigenous people in Alberta. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. You have about 7 minutes to respond.
Well, thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk about that a little more. I'll maybe start with the water projects first. There was a $100 million program. We've kept that intact. We have a fairly large project going on for the Ermineskin First Nation right now. They're part of the Musqueam group down there. We were short of funding on that, so the government actually came up with an additional $13 million for that project. So it's now a $39 million project. It took a while to put it all to pieces together because we are working with the Water Commission out of the Ponoka-Lacombe area on an existing system to run the line up there. So all of those details have come in place now. The Water Commission is working with Ermineskin First Nation to supply that water line down there. So we'll be putting the line down to Ermineskin, and we've sized the line so that if there's 4 First Nations in Musqueam, so you've got Ermineskin, Louisville, Sampson, and Montana. So what we'll be doing is running the water line up to Ermineskin, but the line is sized so that we can expand it from there. Once it gets onto the First Nation, then that becomes a federal program to do any internal lines they want to do. If they just want to do a water station, we're leaving, that'll be up to them, how they want to move forward from that. But they are working with the Water Commission now. The money's in place, and they will be starting to do the line this year. So that line should be in place up to Ermineskin. It's coming. It's quite a long line. They have to come from Lacombe area with the line to Ermineskin. So it's going to be a fairly major project, which is good. That's going to employ a lot of people. There's going to be a lot of people working on that project. It's going to probably take, by the time we get it all done, close to a year. It's a fairly big project, $39 million project. That's nothing to sneeze at. So we're really happy that program's going forward. The chief out there and the staff are really excited that they're finally seeing that come to fruition. So it's fun to be part of these bigger projects and finally get them moving forward. So going back to missing murdered. Like I say, we want to accept we want to do right by the families, make sure that we've taken our time, because this is a very sensitive issue to work with. So we will be receiving the final report in ceremony fairly soon, next week. So we'll do a ceremony around that. It's a tough issue. It's as you heard in the news just the last week or so, another 2 women. Horrible situation. So we have to really make sure we get this right. All of the women involved pretty much have lost somebody in their family. So we've already started on a few things. I wanted to get out of the gate even before we got the report. So when I first went down to the National Inquiry there and we got the original report, there was some things that we could get right off the start. Under what all Canadians could do, there was some action items that we could get going there. I see the member is wearing his leather patch. It's a moose hide patch, they call it. So it's just a symbol, just to remind people that we have to, as men, stand up and defend Indigenous women out there and girls. It's really a good starting point for talking. Last night I was at a function and I had a fellow come up to me, Mayor of Morinville actually, and he says, what is this patch you're wearing? So I was telling him about the Moose Hide campaign and what it's all about. He was so excited because they're doing a ladies' shelter up there right now, and he's going to be contacting us because they're wondering how they could participate in this and get more involved. So to see that everybody is all of a sudden taking this really seriously, what we're doing in our ministry, we're constantly talking about it. A lot of times you'll see me wear the red dress, also the symbol for murdered missing Indigenous women. We accepted a full-size regalia red dress from the Owatan Society down in Calgary. It's downstairs here in the Federal Building. It's in a glass case. Normally things get put on display here for a month or 2. Speakers had it on display for just about 2 years now. It's got its own prominent place in a glass case, so I'm really happy. Once a year we've been doing ceremony there. This year they brought up some little moccasins we put in there. That was a tough day. So we're keeping it going. As the report comes out, you'll see a lot of initiatives that we'll be taking forward. And we did put an additional $1 million in this year to help with the programs that are going on. Some of the things we've already done, as you know, in the legislature, we brought forward Clare's Law to protect against domestic violence. We've funded projects related to employment systems. We've doing a lot of work around human trafficking. Like, who would have thought Alberta had human trafficking issues? Like, it's just hard to even believe that happens here. We've declared October 4th Sisters in Spirit Day. You'll see marches going on around that time. it's such a heartbreaking thing to see these families, and you'll see the ladies wear their red dresses, and then there'll be another little red dress sewn on it. That's somebody that they know. Yeah, it's really personal to me because I know a lot of these families and people have gone missing in my own area, so that's why we've put so much effort into it. And it became one of the first things we did. We went down to Awaton and met the ladies there, and they gave me my first red dress that I wear in my jacket. A lot of times you see me wear it, and so it's been quite a journey, and I'm glad that the department supports me so much on it. I can't thank you enough for your work on this, Christina. And I know we're going to make a difference. We're going to make a
Very much,
difference.
Minister, and we all do recognize your passion for your portfolio, and definitely respect the hard work that you put in. We'll now move on to 20 minutes with the government caucus. And would you like to remain with the block portion?
Please. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So you have 10 minutes, gentlemen, ladies.
Thanks, Minister. Thanks, Chair. And yeah, again, Minister, it's obviously out in my area we have the Michelle, Van Alexander, Alexis, and Paul. And you know, when the events broke out in Kamloops, it was such a wound that was opened up again for everybody. And dealing with the leaders out in those areas was very telling about the efforts that have been taking place in trying to get things recognized and to do the right things going forward. And acknowledge, you know, fully your comments earlier. You know, was the feedback I had from some of the elders and leaders out there as well, was that allowing them the best place, best space, and best time to heal and go forward as well. What I did find was that the community really got behind it, not just on the First Nations communities themselves, but our local communities. Businesses stepping up, wanting to try to help out, you know, some of the folks that had the ground penetrating radar and some of the drone technology and everything else. Like everybody just, it was a full court press. Everybody wanted to jump in and fix it right away. And it was probably more to the point of trying to hold them back from causing more harm than good, of stirring the pot. Everybody really wanted to get in behind this. And something we need to acknowledge, recognize, and move forward together on for sure. The other thing too, Minister, you know, coming back to the plan here, on page 23 of the fiscal plan, there was one of the biggest initiatives of the budget. It was the Alberta at Work plan. And the initiative intends to create pathways and success for Albertans. Indigenous communities, Alberta are a home and young, highly skilled, motivated workforce and a wide variety of transferable skills. So prior life, I couldn't tell you more than that when we were pipelining, and you get together these communities and to see what's around the table. And you're a great storyteller. Maybe I'm not as good as you, but I'm going to share one with you as well. And I can remember first, we were up in the Fort McKay group, and sitting there with, I'm not going to name the company, but it was one of those that rhymes with TC. So we're sitting up looking at this project, and as a construction manager, they couldn't imagine why I was heading out with the Indigenous Relations groups. And quite frankly, I told everybody around the table, and the chiefs and the folks that were there, I said, well, so these guys don't make promises I can't keep. Nothing worse when you go to execute a project and somebody else makes commitments. And then the other thing too is a noticeable paradigm shift of the advancements. So God bless the folks from our internally from the company, their group, and they're talking about outreach programs and maybe how we can teach people how to become welders and everything else. And I'm looking around the room, and here's the trap that people set into. They go through a standard protocol rather than getting to know folks off the front end. And the lady was talking about all that, and I paused her and I said, let's stop for a second. I turned to this young fellow that was sitting beside me, and he's wearing a ball cap and he's kind of got trendy clothes on. I said, you feel like being a welder? Not really. I said, what's your business? Well, actually, I do drone technology. We do heat sensors. We're doing all this geospatial mapping. We're up in, I said, yeah. So I turned to the lady and I said, maybe let's start with that. Let's start with who do we have around the table? What skill sets do they have, and how do we apply it to the project? So with that, I was very excited to see that on page 23 of the fiscal plan and talking about that. And moreover, Minister, the AIOC. So I know that we just finished working through the Corridors Task Force, and some of the reports that you're going to see, and I appreciate the efforts your group gave us as well. was simply that we can't be a one-trick pony in one industry. The First Nations are advancing so much and want to participate in so many different items and elements and expanding the AIOC. So if you can, in your block, when you get a chance to talk about it, can you please talk about the new updated mandates from AIOC, how that applies, how we can leverage that? And then on page 58 of the Ministry Business Plan, it talks about the Aboriginal Businesses Investment Fund, how it supports projects, number of Indigenous community-owned businesses. I know you told us a little bit about that one upstart business that's now churning out $1 million a year in the first year, which is phenomenal. If you can tell us about some more about that program, how we can receive the funding on it, which people can access it, how do you just spread the good word, quite frankly, how it covers all the capital costs of the Indigenous community-owned economic development programs, or does it only handle the partial funding? And then how does it improve the economic outcomes for Indigenous communities? So I really want you to try to explain more on that. And then a different item too is the Indigenous Housing Capital Program. So it intends to increase the supply of affordable housing units for the Indigenous peoples in need. Page 162, I believe, of the capital plan, it adds about $20.7 million on the back of the napkin here of additional funding towards Indigenous housing program over the next 3 years. So if you could talk about the overview of that program, what type of housing does it include? Is it construction, repurpose, build up from brand new or leveraging other properties? Who's eligible for that program as well? And then, Minister, one of the other things that came up through COVID was the interface. So when we had, it's a very fine point as well, and, Councillor Myrna Rabbit out in my area and Paul, we've had a bit of a working relationship going for the last few years. And really it comes down to, Minister, the drug issues. And I know that there's overlaps between federal and provincial, and it always seems like we seem to be falling through the cracks there in these areas. And again, it comes back to the young folks in those communities. How do we break that cycle? How does that tie in? I'm not sure how it weaves in between the feds, yourself, and then some of the other ministries when it comes to mental health and addictions. But maybe you can talk about that, of the work that we've done over the last while, and then how do we take those steps to go forward, because that's really a big issue. And then the other thing too, I'd like to give credit where credit is due. Again, when we worked on the Corridors Task Force, your group was helping us in behind to do some really good work. And the folks that were on the task force from the First Nations community were Chief Fox, Chief Whitney, Chief Standing on the Road, Chief Morin, and also President Quintel. And then who wasn't on the task force was Chief Isaac up in that Treaty 8 area. And they came up with a new business model as well of dealing with economic relations. So maybe you can talk a little bit about some of those interfaces and some of the work that your department does, and as it relates to the budget for those programs going forward, to make sure that when we are doing these works and we're expanding the economy and looking at these pathways of how we're making sure that we're respecting how each one of those communities functions in their treaties respectively. And then how do we build on the next steps? Is there something in your department, your privy, if you're forecasting more projects of such going forward? And then obviously a shout out to my area. I've got a new Grand Chief in my area, Chief Arcand. He's phenomenal. I mean, he's just excellent. First time he came in, we were meeting on bi-weekly basis just to catch up. Chief Alexis, again, another all-star, Chief Rain, and Chief Gortz too from Michelle Band. So again, at the Alberta International Air Show, these gentlemen were all there, and actually it was Chief Gortz and Chief Arcand that led us off in starting that. So if you can talk as well, Minister, of some of the new opportunities that are coming forward by having these reconciliation type relationships, as you would, to help take those next steps for those communities. If you could expand on that and how that relates. And I think I'll cede the time back to you if you want to take that and respond back to me now.
Go ahead, Minister, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much for your comments, and I know you always say you come from God's country up there. I know. It is beautiful country, and I've been lucky enough to travel through it quite a bit over the last couple of years, and really get an appreciation of why you got such a heart for the land up there. And I know you worked in the industry for a lot of years, and your approach to working with Indigenous people I find very refreshing. You understand them probably better, the culture, because you've worked up there, you've lived up there, you understand how important the land is to the Indigenous people. And your work around the energy corridor was just second to none. I really applaud you for what you've done up there. That's our key to the future, is working with the Indigenous people, ESG, and now I think we have to expand that to as well as I think the world is finally realizing how important our energy is with what's going on in the Ukraine right now. Why would we want to bring in energy from Russia when we've got the best ethically produced oil and gas right here in Alberta? We really have to start celebrating our industry more and more. Like the people that work out there, the young people, this is the part that really frustrates me. My niece is an environmental engineer. Like, these are the most highly trained people in the world, and young people working in this field, and yet the world is saying we don't know what we're doing. Like, it bothers me because these people are so proud of the work that they do, these young folks, and you get up there where they've been doing these reclamation projects, amazing work. And if we can work with the First Nations, Indigenous people, and Métis people on these energy corridors, that's the key to our success right there. Getting our, like, there's an energy, like when you talk to some of our ministers from India, like where they still use cow dung to cook on. Like, it's ridiculous when we've got all this energy right here. And I'm so encouraged with some of the projects going forward around our LNG projects and blue hydrogen, and being able to take our energy to the world to help these developing countries to get people out of that energy poverty. Yeah, energy poverty, that's basically what it is. So I'm really encouraged with what you're doing on your programs there, and that's why we talk about the litigation fund. That's why it's important to get these First Nations involved in that litigation fund to fight back against Trudeau's tanker ban. A tanker ban on the West Coast to ship our energy around the world that needs our energy so bad, so they're not using cow dung to cook on. Like, it's just incredible. So thank you for your work on that. That's great work. We talked a little bit about the AIOC again and our extended mandate. So, of course, we started off because we wanted to really highlight our natural resources. Like, anywhere else in the world, they'd die to have our natural resources. I mean, we've got the most ethically produced oil and gas that there is. So we started out with oil and gas, forestry, mining, and renewables. We do have a project we're working on, again, I think it was with the Ermineskin Band. We help fund them. They're working on a renewable project as well, because that's part of it. That's diversifying the economy. That's all part of it. But it can't be just one part. It all has to tie together. So if we can work with the hydrogen projects, some renewable projects, our good oil and gas, we can make a difference and help people all around the world. So, and like I said before, we wanted to expand the mandate because we'd heard from the Indigenous communities that they needed. Not everybody's blessed to have oil and gas in their backyard, but they do have a lot of really great land out there. So agriculture becomes really important. And COVID really showed that food security is so important. I hear that from pretty much every Indigenous community out there, food security. So we expanded it into agriculture and as well as the broadband initiatives and transportation. So those are the three areas where we've got expansion. So if your communities, if you have a project that you think would work with them, like, encourage them to bring it forward. We're reviewing projects all the time. We put the three big ones out there, of course, is the Cascade Project up by Edson. And that little community right now, you cannot get a hotel room, you can't get a bed and breakfast. People are renting out their basements because the town is full. The town is booming. They want to have at least 1,500 people. They probably could use another 500 right now. So if somebody's looking for a job, send them out there. Like they said, even a chubby old guy like me could get a job pushing brooms. So, so there's lots of availability for work up there. And we're talking about training and that type of thing. When we were up there, I knew it was a big project, but I didn't realize how big it was. This is a mega project. when you see the size of what's going on out there. And Alexis First Nation, the Backwoods Energy, they did all the groundwork. All Indigenous people did all the groundwork to start off there. It was all Indigenous people. One young girl come up to me, she was apprenticing to become an electrician. She was so proud to be part of Alberta's recovery. It was just, I'll tell you, just heart-touching to see how proud she was and getting this training, and she's going to be able to support her family. Like, that's why I do this. It's to be able to help young people is just the best thing you can possibly do. So that project's going forward. That was 6 First Nations on that one. Yeah, so we had Alexis, of course, Enoch, Kiyuan, Ochis, Paul, and Whitefish. We're all partners in that. And I mean real partners. Like, we backstopped them $93 million to be part of a $1.5 billion project. It's going to provide 8% of Alberta's power with good, clean Alberta natural gas. They're using the newest technology for carbon capture. Like, it checks off all the boxes. Like, it checks every box. Like, and like I say, the community is booming. It's so great to see Alberta back again. Like I say, buckle up, because this is happening. And you can see it from our housing markets and everything else. Like, I was at a function last night, there was a couple of builders there. Their biggest problem, again, is getting labor. That's why I really think we need to try to help Ukrainian people wherever we can, and bring those good, hardworking people here, and they can be part of our Getting Alberta Back to Work program. Because everywhere I go in the province, that's the biggest concern I hear. Everybody needs labor. Everybody needs help, and skilled labor, and training labor, you name it. Everybody is looking for people right now. So if we can bring some people in and help them immigrate and get them started, there's lots of work here in Alberta, and it's really great to see that Alberta, we're back, and it's part of it's, I'm going to blow our horn a little bit. This is what our government has done. We've lowered the corporate tax rate, and by doing so, created more corporate tax than we had before with a higher rate, because the businesses are coming in. The premier's out there working hard. He's brought lots of different companies in the technology area. There's so much stuff happening. Anybody wants to be a movie star? Now's the time to do it. My little granddaughter was in 2 movies this summer, if you can imagine. There's so much. There's one young fellow in my area. There's the new Predator movie. I'll give him a little plug. New Predator movie coming out, and one of the stars in that movie is right from my area. Good-looking young fella. Since he's done that, he's kind of become a bit of a rock star. He's been doing modeling gigs down in Australia. He's down in California right now. His mom is so proud of him. She lives right beside my sister there, so I get to visit with him quite a bit. And so to see the difference you can make when we're moving forward, and the economy's coming back, and people are getting pride from working, like, that's what it's all about. That's what our government's been working hard to do. Like, we're focused. Everybody I know in this room is laser focused on jobs and economy and getting Alberta back to work. So thanks for bringing that. Oh, and ABEF, yeah. So we should talk about ABEF. How much time have I got here? Oh, just a minute. Aboriginal Business Investment Fund. One of my best tools in the toolbox. It's up to $500,000. These are straight grants. So it really helps, like we talked about, communities that maybe aren't as sophisticated. So out in my area, Montana Band, food security, a big issue. So they got an ABF grant this year to build a greenhouse. So they're going to be growing their own food on site, training people, again, young kids, teaching them how to manage a greenhouse operation. Plus, they're doing the construction.
Thank you, Minister. Members, you have about 2 minutes, just over 2 minutes left.
Sure. So I can cede my time to MLA Guthrie.
Go ahead, Mr. Guthrie.
Yeah, thanks for being here this morning, Minister. I just have a couple of questions. The first on red tape reduction, budget 2022-23, the government is committing once again to reducing red tape. On page 60 of the ministry plan, it discusses the ministry's commitment to support that red tape reduction effort. So could you just explain what your department has been doing to contribute to that commitment? And I guess also maybe just elaborate on what the benefit is for Indigenous people in Alberta to that red tape reduction. The next portion here, I guess, would be in relation to natural resources. Page 21 of the strategic plan, objective 4, says standing up for Alberta's natural resources. You know, as a plan of action for this objective, the government of Alberta is committed to work with First Nations, Métis settlements, and other Métis communities to support participation in natural resource and energy sectors. So I guess the first question would be, you know, what are the initiatives that are in the budget that support this objective? And then 2, if you can elaborate on the importance of that participation. And then lastly, what are the main concerns that you hear from Indigenous peoples in relations to, you know, to this participation in the natural resource and energy sectors? So I'll leave it at that and let you respond.
Well, thank you, Minister. You have about 10 seconds, so you may try, but we'll be moving on.
I'm proud to say that we were the first ones to get our red tape reduced to 34%. We're at about 32. We had to add a little bit more.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now move back over to the official opposition for a 10-minute block.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can see why the Minister has chosen to go to the block segment, because then you don't really have to answer any questions, just exchange bar stories with members.
I would just remind you that it's up to the official opposition to pick which ministry gets a 2-hour block. So if you have issues with the amount of time, then you need to go back to your party leadership.
It has nothing to do with that. Block answers, that was the Minister's choice. Minister, I asked a number of questions before my break, so I will assume that if I give you some time that you'll answer as many of those, but let me throw in a few more before the break. I'm interested that you said that you kept the $100 million in the Water to Reserve program, but you indicated that there was a shortage for ermine skin, so you added up some more to bring it up to $39 million for that one project. Can you tell me, does that mean you've actually spent more than $100 million? And can you also detail for us how many other nations are in line for the project and where they're at in the 3-step process there? Sorry, I've only got a few minutes. I want to give you some time to answer a few of these things. I would like to know the status of the training for the civil servants in terms of Indigenous histories, traditions, and knowledge. Can you tell me if this program is still in existence? Is that reflected anywhere in terms of your budget here today? Was there a decision not to proceed with phase 2 of the project, and why is it discontinued? Can you tell me if the Treaty 8 Trappers Association agreement was in fact honored, and whether or not funds are flowing through to them? So I understand they're not. Minister, the last thing, because I really want to give you time, I've asked a lot of questions, I haven't had answers for any of them. The last thing I want to talk about is the release of the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate report on children in care. The news is deeply unsettling. In the past 11 months, there have been 45 deaths of children in care. The record in previous years was only 34, so in 11 months, because they had to do the report early, it's gone up from 34 to 45, so I'm assuming it'll be somewhere around 50 by the end. But to date, 36 of those are Indigenous children. And this is a significant increase over previous years, and currently 64% of all children in care are Indigenous. Can the Minister tell this committee if Indigenous Relations is participating in any way in actions to address these terrible numbers, and which division is assisting in the cross-governmental initiative? Where in the budget do we find anything with regard to attempts to reduce the number of children coming into care and attempts to to stop the death of Indigenous children at these extremely high numbers. And I will give you some time to answer those questions. I have more, but we're running out of time.
Go ahead, Minister, you have 5 minutes to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with the water question you asked there. So like I said, that is in progress right now. We did put in, beyond that, we put an additional 13 million in because we were a little shy for the Ermineskin project that is going forward. I'd have to check on the exact numbers, but I believe so. So that's a $39 million project. It's in progress, so the engineering is done and they're getting ready to start putting the actual line in the ground. So it'll be a good project. Like I said, it's going to create a lot of employment, and we're trying to work with the First Nations to get them to do a lot of the work themselves. So they're excited to be partners within that. Like I always say, we call it partners in prosperity, and I've noticed you started using that line on your side of the house, but we started it, so we're proud of that one. The Mikisew Cree First Nation, that project is in progress. That's 20.1 million. Whitefish Goodfish First Nation, that's in progress as well. The Cold Lake First Nation Bonnyville one, 3.2 million. That's substantially completed, that one. And the Denetaw Boucher River one, that one is also substantially completed. So the money is all basically going out the door. Those projects are either in progress or about to be started. So that's where we're at on that one. So in budget 2022, there's 14.3 allocated for First Nations drinking water tie-in, and that's part of Alberta Transportation's budget. So it's beyond what Indigenous Relations budget would be. The Indigenous Learning Initiative, really proud of that one. Like I say, I just met Gilman the other day. He was putting on a course out here. He calls me his adopted grandson, so I'm really proud of that. That's still going, it's ongoing. So right to date, more than 14,000 Alberta Public Service employees have completed the introductory training since its launch. So that's pretty good. Indigenous training creates a desire for further learning, respectful dialogue, improved relations, and ultimately reconciliation. The training addresses a lot of myths and misconceptions and stereotypes and serves to change behaviors. So the participants, they gain a greater understanding of the long-term impact of colonialism, assimilation policies, how residential schools have led to the long-standing systemic racism. The Trappers Association, so well, thank you. And we're carrying on bigger and better than ever. So on the Treaty 8 Trappers Association, I'm proud to say the president is actually one of my best friends. He sits on my constituency board, actually, so I hear all about it all the time, and he's a great guy. And talk about an entrepreneur, he's just started another new business himself. He's in the building all those what are they called, the rig platforms? Rig mats. Yep, he's into that business, rig matting. And also on the sideline, he's started a business for cleaning algae up in lakes. And he says he's got the answer to it, so I hope he does, because that's a huge issue. If we can clean that algae up in the summertime, that'd be awesome. So he's a great guy. I work with him really close, and he lives actually just around the corner from me. Children in care, that's children's services, so I can't really address too much on that. So going back to some of your original questions around the friendship centers. So that annual funding has been maintained. It's $720,000 for Alberta Native Friendship Center Association. And as well, like, we do a lot of cross-ministry work, and like I said, we did with the Minister of Seniors and Homes, we just did a project with the Friendship Center down in Calgary on a seniors lodge down there. That was really exciting. And the best part of working with the Friendship Centers on something like that is it's all culturally sensitive and done so that the elders, they can have areas where they can do smudging and the type of things that you wouldn't typically be able to do in a regular seniors lodge. So it's great that we can work with them on that. the Institute for Advancement of Aboriginal Women. So we've been really, really good on that one. There's just about $300,000 for the Job Readiness Navigator Program.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll now move over to the Government Caucus for 5 and 5. So go ahead. Who's on your speakers list?
So over to MLA Rain.
Go ahead. Mr. Rain.
Minister, on page 144 of the fiscal plan, it states that this ministry is in charge of working with Indigenous communities, the federal government, industry, stakeholders to support strong and vibrant Indigenous communities and people who can fully participate in a prosperous, competitive, diverse Alberta. I also see budget line 2 of the government estimate. It explains that the budget item First Nations and Metis Relations is responsible for establishing effective relationships, legislation, policies, and initiatives for Indigenous governments and organizations, and administers the Metis settlements legislation. I'm also aware that Budget 2022 maintains the funding for protocol agreements between Indigenous communities and Alberta's government. Can the minister tell us about your relationship with Treaty 6, the Blackfoot Confederacy, and G4, and how it impacts protocol agreements? Now, concerning Metis Relations specifically, the capital plan shows $2.1 million towards long-term governance and funding arrangements agreement, LTA, for the 2022-2023 budget. With 1 year remaining of LTA, how does the Government of Alberta intend to address the long-term sustainability of the Metis settlements, 10A? Less than half of the Metis people in Alberta are represented by the Metis Nation of Alberta, MNA. How is this government ensuring that all Metis people in Alberta are having their voices heard and concerns addressed? Residential schools are part of one of the darkest times in our history, and 2 weeks ago, researchers from the University of Alberta found 169 potential unmarked graves at St. Bernard's Indian Residential School. This is a hard and profoundly troubling reminder of the commitment we all have towards working for reconciliation. The Residential Schools Community Research Grant is a program with the objective to fund engagement, research, and support healing for those affected by Indian residential schools. The fiscal plan, page 144, shows that $8 million in operating expenses will provide funding to this program. This grant works toward these activities for either documented or undocumented deaths and burial. Can you further explain the importance of this program as part of our commitment to reconciliation? Can the minister also explain how people in my community access such funding? What other supports are there available for residential school survivors and the families of those who never returned home? I see my time, Mr. Chair, to MLA Lovely.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Minister. A few questions for you. The Ministry Business Plan indicates that this ministry works to make life safer for Indigenous women and girls. Now that Alberta Joint Working Group on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls submitted their final report in January, what is the Government of Alberta doing to address the recommendations provided by the final report from the Alberta Joint Working Group on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, 9A? How much funding is being provided to address such recommendations? How has the Indigenous Women's Council on Economic Security influenced government programs or policies? How is their role important to the government? That's 9B. What kind of support does your ministry offer to Indigenous women through funding the Institute for the Advancement of Aboriginal Women, 9C? Can you provide more information regarding the Victim Services Family Information Liaison Unit and their work to support families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls? And I have one more question here. Budget line 3 shows an increase of $0.89 million towards Indigenous women's initiatives. Can you explain why your ministry is significantly increasing such funding? And can you elaborate on the different programs that this budget line supports? And Minister, that wraps up my prepared questions, but I wanted to sincerely thank you for all the good work that you do in the province, and it touches my community as well. So
Thank you, and unfortunately, Minister, you only have about 15 seconds, but.
Well, let me just say thank you, everyone, for all your great questions. And like I said at the start of this is a good news budget for Indigenous relations. We're increasing funding for the missing murdered Indigenous women.
Thank you very much. I apologize for the interruption, but I must advise the committee that the time allotted for consideration of the ministry's estimates has concluded. I'd like to remind committee members that we are scheduled to meet this afternoon, March 16th, 2022 at 3:30 p.m. to consider the estimates of the Ministry of Energy. Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.